Tonight, guns in America. A stunning new poll shows just how many have been affected by firearms and how some ministries are working to bring peace to those most impacted. Plus,
that I feel like you're backing me into a corner, asking me to choose if I'm going to honor God or am I going to obey you as my authority, my employer.
Details of a new religious liberty case heading to the Supreme Court. And 16 million gone over the last decade. A look at why so many women are walking away from the church. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation.
Sobering new statistics highlight the toll gun violence is taking. Thanks for joining us. In Washington, I'm Jenna Browder.
Good evening. In Washington, I'm John Jessup. Well, new data shows gun violence affects the lives of more than half of all Americans. That statistic comes when just at a quarter into a new year, we've already seen more than 140 mass shootings.
Including this week in Louisville, where 5 people were killed at a bank. CBN's Brody Carter is taking a closer look at the data and its human impact, speaking to someone ministering to families in Kentucky. Brody?
John, Jenna, I spoke to one chaplain with the Billy Graham Rapid Response Team on the ground in Kentucky, ministering to families in the wake of this week's tragedy. They ask for prayers, support in this difficult situation. A brief warning, though, what you're about to watch may be disturbing.
113 Baker Rock, and we do have shots fired.
Monday's gun battle at the Old National Bank in downtown Louisville shows the horror caused by an active shooter.
Don't have an angle.
And the courage of those running towards danger.
Suspect down! Get the officer!
5 people died, another 8 injured, including a Louisville officer who responded after 25-year-old bank employee Connor Sturgeon started shooting coworkers.
The heart is wicked, the Bible says. The prophet Jeremiah says the heart is wicked above all who could know it.
Jason Scalzi, a retired police officer, has seen a lifetime of death and destruction. He and his wife now work with the Billy Graham Rapid Response Team, serving in the most difficult circumstances.
When we deploy to these types of situations, our initiative is to provide emotional and spiritual support, to listen to people who are grieving, to weep with those who weep.
Monday's shooting is the 15th mass killing in the U.S. this year, 2 weeks after a former student fatally shot 3 children and 3 adults at a Christian elementary school in Nashville, Tennessee.
1 in 5 parents say they've either pulled their child from a school, changed a child's school, or thought about changing a child's school because of they're worried about gun violence.
That statistic comes from research just released from the Kaiser Family Foundation. Ashley Kurzinger, director of survey methodology, helped lead the nationwide study tracking American experiences with gun-related violence.
We didn't put out the survey because of what happened in Louisville. It's just, unfortunately, it seems like we can't go more than several days in this country without news of a shooting.
Some of those results include 1 in 5 adults have personally witnessed a shooting. 1 in 3 black adults have had a family member killed by a gun. And 84% of adults surveyed have taken at least one precaution to protect themselves or their families from gun violence.
That leads us to more than half of U.S. adults in this country have either personally experienced or had a family member experience an incident with a gun like this.
The bottom line is that this world is broken. It's a sin issue. And we don't get involved with gun control and talking about that. We're just here to point people to Christ, number one, because we know it's a sin issue.
While both organizations see this as a health crisis, they also keep clear of policy issues. Kurzinger did express that the Kaiser data uncovered an opportunity for health officials to get more involved in this conversation. That's because it notes only 5% of adults say a doctor or other healthcare provider has ever talked to them about gun safety. Jenna, back to you.
All right, in the newsroom, Brody Carter, thank you very much. Well, in economic news tonight, March numbers show inflation cooling slightly. The new Consumer Price Index out today shows a 5% increase in inflation from last March, lower than the 6% year-over-year number seen in February. The drop comes as gas and grocery prices have gone down, though still remaining high. which paves the way for the Federal Reserve to continue raising interest rates to fight inflation.
Well, here now to discuss is E.J. Antoni, an economist at the Heritage Foundation. E.J., as you just heard, annual inflation fell from 6% to 5% in March. Your initial impressions of the latest CPI report?
Well, obviously, anytime we see inflation coming down, that's a welcome sign for consumers. But what's particularly troubling is when we hear many of our so-called leaders taking a victory lap on this data as if inflation being twice the target rate is something to celebrate.
Yeah. So this was the 9th consecutive month inflation dropped. That has to be a positive sign. Can you talk about maybe some of the bright spots in this report?
Oh, certainly. I mean, it's very, very good that we're seeing, for example, energy prices come down, because those energy prices affect literally everything else within the economy. I think we really underestimate just how much energy factors into the price of everything else. But the problem here is that we have completely depleted the strategic petroleum reserve so that we don't have the operational capacity that reserve used to provide us. And as a result of that, now as we see the OPEC plus nations cutting production, as we have hamstrung production here at home, for example, we don't really have any recourse when energy prices start going back up later this year.
Today, EJ, you were tweeting about real weekly earnings combined with higher borrowing costs. You say the duo has effectively reduced the average family's annual income by more than $7,000. Can you expand a little on that?
Certainly. So what happens is, as prices go up faster than wages, even though you actually have more money in your paycheck, you can buy less. And so that's what we mean when we talk about real wages. Inflation has robbed you of your purchasing power. But on top of that, as the Federal Reserve belatedly raises rates in order to combat the inflation that they themselves helped cause, now what we're seeing is that borrowing costs are going up. And that's true on everything from your mortgage to your student loans, from your auto loans to your credit cards. And that makes those regular borrowing costs more expensive. So you combine these two, and for your average American family, that's $7,100 effectively gone from your annual budget. I mean, I can't overestimate how devastating that is for many families. That represents more than a month's income for a lot of folks.
Yeah, that's a stunning figure for sure. You know, EJ, what would you like to see the Fed do in this situation? It kind of seems like they're stuck between a rock and a hard place.
Oh, absolutely. They are in a mess, but it's of their own making. They kept rates far too low for far too long in order to subsidize government spending. I mean, this is what happens when the government spends, borrows, and prints trillions of dollars that it doesn't have. So what do they need to do now to start cleaning up the mess? They need to do exactly what Paul Volcker did in the early 1980s, where he turned to the Treasury Department and says, I'm washing my hands of this mess. If you want to borrow money, you need to sell those Treasury bonds on your own. The Fed needs to stop buying them. They need to stop subsidizing the Treasury's borrowing. And that's going to cause rates to go much higher, much faster, but it's what needs to be done. You know, these higher interest rates, a lot of people talk about how they are breaking things in the financial market. They're not breaking anything. It was the low rates that broke the functioning of financial markets. The high rates are just exposing the fraud.
All right, EJ Antoni with Heritage Foundation, thank you so much. Thanks for breaking that down.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks, EJ. Well, a new case heading to the Supreme Court raises an important question about work and the right to worship. Next Tuesday, the justices hear arguments about an employer accommodation for a mail carrier who wanted to attend church. CBN's Matt Galka sat down with a postal worker to discuss his fight to keep Sunday sacred.
Welcome to Lancaster County in rural Pennsylvania, the latest battleground for religious freedom. It's here that Gerald Groff served as a postman starting back in 2012.
In the countryside, as opposed to a city carrier who delivers it in town, and using my own vehicle, driving from the passenger seat with my leg and my left arm across, driving the steering wheel and operating the pedals. And I would just go out and deliver my route.
Groff saw the job as a natural fit because with no mail delivery on Sundays, he could observe Sabbath.
I was raised in a Christian family. There was no question about working on Sunday. We always refrained from working on the Lord's Day.
Then Sunday service changed. Groff says when the USPS entered into an agreement with Amazon to deliver packages, A collective bargaining agreement had him scheduled for some Sunday shifts. At first, he found ways to work around it.
I did extra work during the week. For example, on a Saturday, we had an auxiliary route, which is like a half of a route, and there would be nobody to cover that often because of a lack of staff. So I would be delivering a full route, an 8-hour shift, and then come back and take the auxiliary route as well. And in that way, I was demonstrating to my coworkers that I was doing my part as well.
Groff eventually transferred to a different location that hadn't yet started delivering on Sundays. That changed in 2017. Unable to always find coworkers to cover his Sunday shifts, Groff got into trouble for not showing up. After years of tension, Groff quit in 2019 and sued the Postal Service. His case has made it all the way to the Supreme Court.
I said, I feel like you're backing me into a corner, asking me to choose if I'm going to honor God or am I going to obey you as my authority, and my employer. I said, I mean no disrespect to you as my employer, but I have to choose God.
What's at stake is how many accommodations employers have to make based on religion. A 1977 SCOTUS decision requires workers be reasonably accommodated for their religious beliefs without undue hardship on the employer. A lower court ruled that Groff's request for Sundays off created a burden for coworkers and his workplace. Randall Wenger helped get his case to the High Court.
I think the message for everyone is our rights rise and fall together. So be out there rooting for Gerald, because that's the liberty that we can all enjoy.
Members of Congress, including Senators Tim Scott, Marco Rubio, and James Lankford, are backing Groff with a brief encouraging the court to revisit the definition of undue hardship.
Let's protect the right for an individual to live their faith. If a person is a Muslim and they need to be able to pray 5 times a day, and we can adjust around that for them to be able to do that, why wouldn't we do that? If a person is a Christian faith that says they're very strict on the Sabbath and they want to be able to do that, why wouldn't we adjust around that to be able to allow them to be able to live this faith? This is a basic human dignity issue that we shouldn't step on.
Other religious groups are also supporting Groff, as his case could have a far-reaching impact on the future of faith in the workplace.
I really can't change what happened to me. That's in the past. But my motivation would be that if we win, first, we glorify God, and second, that we protect religious freedom so that doesn't happen to somebody else here in America.
Here at the Supreme Court, oral arguments for the case are scheduled to begin April 18th. A decision could be one of the most consequential religious freedom determinations of the past 40 years. Matt Gelka, CBN News.
All right, thank you, Matt. Well, to election 2024, South Carolina Senator Tim Scott making moves today toward a presidential run.
I know America is a land of opportunity, not a land of oppression. I know it because I've lived it. That's why it pains my soul to see the Biden liberals attacking every rung of the ladder that helped me climb. This is personal to me. I will never back down in defense of the conservative values that make America exceptional. And that's why I'm announcing my exploratory committee for President of the United States.
And the senator says the left weaponizes race to divide America. The only black Republican senator, he says he disrupts their narrative.
Coming up, a new EPA proposal that could alter the future of car buying in America. Welcome back. The Biden administration is revving up for a big boost in electric car sales. The EPA announcing today 2 new proposals to cut auto emissions and move the car industry toward a mostly electric future.
That EPA is proposing the strongest ever federal pollution technology standards for both cars and trucks. Together, today's actions will accelerate our ongoing transition to a clean vehicles future, tackle the climate crisis head on, and improve air quality for communities all across the country.
The proposed new emission rules would lead to the electrification of 2/3 of new cars and SUVs by 2032. The EPA will take public comments on the rules before they're finalized next year. The changes would take effect starting with cars made in 2027.
Anthony Watts is a senior fellow for environment and climate at the Heartland Institute, and he joins us now for more. Anthony, welcome. So the EPA proposal has a twofold effect: to cut auto pollution and then to do so by boosting the sales of electric vehicles. The question, how realistic is this?
I would say completely unrealistic. For example, recently on CNN, there's a feature they have called Roman's numeral. And Roman's numeral said 47% of U.S. adults say it's not likely that they'll buy an electric vehicle. Now, with almost half the nation saying, I don't want an electric vehicle, yet the government saying you're going to buy an electric vehicle, that means we're headed for some kind of a clash. And I would expect what this is going to do is not actually increase the sales of electric vehicle, but increase the sales of used cars and cause a spike in the value of used cars. Because if you can't buy a new car that's powered by gasoline, where do you go?
I would imagine, Anthony, that 47% statistic you just used, not all, but maybe some, might be affected by the cost of new EVs, which is more than $55,000. And I understand that the new rules from the Inflation Reduction Act could cut the $7,500 tax credit for new electric vehicle purchases by half. Won't that also affect demand?
Of course it will. The idea of electric vehicles always seems to have been developed for the elite and the people that are in the 2% and higher brackets of income. A lot of people simply can't afford an electric vehicle, even if it's subsidized to some degree. And the other big problem that we've got is that at the same time, while the Biden administration is saying we're going to push for more electric vehicle sales, they're not working on increasing the infrastructure of our nation's electric grid. Right now, we don't have but a tiny fraction of the necessary charging stations to support adding more electric vehicles. But even worse, the electric grid is not hardened and improved to be able to deliver electricity in the places that it needs it.
Do you think car makers know that? And are automakers, willing to go further than what they've said so far? They, produce enough EVs to make up half of new car sales by 2030. Your thoughts on that?
Well, there's not enough electricity in one case, but also there's another big problem. There's not enough raw materials. Most of the specialized materials that go into electric vehicles that make the magnets and so forth, rare materials like cobalt, for example, is not widely available and easily available in the United States. And so what this does is it increases our reliance on imports of rare earths elsewhere from around the world instead of getting them here in the United States. And so this creates a greater trade imbalance in addition to the fact that it's going to drive up the cost, because when rare earths start becoming more and more used, it's naturally going to create a market situation where they're more expensive. And so I would suspect that the price of electric cars now will probably go up at least 25 to 30% by the time the Biden administration gets this thing running in 2027.
Well, if that is the case, that will definitely impact demand. Anthony Watts with the Heartland Institute, thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Women walking away from faith, why so many are leaving the church, and how to win them back. Welcome back. Well, as we've reported here on Faith Nation, studies show faith is on the decline in America, leading to a drop in church attendance.
That's especially true among women, 16 million of whom have walked away from the church in the last decade, leading one author to try to find out why. CBN's Charlene Aaron reports.
In her book, Reason to Return, Why Women Need the Church and the Church Needs Women, Erica Anderson says many women who leave the church still consider themselves Christian. She encourages those who have been hurt or disillusioned to reconsider what church has to offer.
The phrase that I like to use a lot is the church of your past doesn't have to be the church of your future.
Author and freelance journalist Erica Anderson has spent most of her life in church. While she admits it is far from perfect, she invites women to rediscover joy and purpose in attending. On CBN's Prayer Link, Anderson shared that passion as the motivation for her new book, Reason to Return, Why Women Need the Church and the Church Needs Women.
After seeing some data about how many women were leaving church and showing that women were leaving church at a much faster rate than men in the past 10 years specifically, I knew there was a message that they needed to hear, because so many of those women, they're not turning away from God, but they do need an invitation back to faith community.
According to Pew Research, women have grown noticeably less religious over the last decade. The share of nuns among women has risen by 10% since 2009. and the share of women who identify as Christian has fallen from 80% to 69% over that same period. Issues like Church Too, involving sexual abuse scandals, have played somewhat of a role in the decline. A recent article in Relevant magazine points out that a growing number of single women are leaving over that issue. By far, the biggest factor propelling women out of the church is sex. The Church Too movement attested to just how damaging irresponsible handling of the church's messages of sexual purity can be for some women, the article says. Anderson also discovered millions have left for a variety of reasons.
One of the number one reasons is overwhelm, stress, busyness, which you might, immediately conclude like, oh, maybe it's deconstruction or maybe it's people, deconverting. But the truth is that most women that are leaving the church, they are not deconverting. They are not deconstructing. They still value their relationship with God. Many of them are looking for a little bit of guidance, a friend to walk with them.
Guidance found in healthy faith communities that are beneficial for women and their families.
All kinds of benefits happen for you and your family, including better rates of mental health, better relationships, better even physical health. And then your children are also growing up in this really firm faith foundation where they can thrive and are less anxious and less depressed and go into adulthood, feeling confident about who they are and where they are in the world.
Charlene Aaron, CBN News.
New York's finest goes to the dogs. We explain next on Faith Nation. Finally tonight, a new addition to the New York City Police Force.
That's right. NYC Mayor Eric Adams has unveiled the NYPD's latest recruit, unlike any you've probably seen before. Meet DigiDog. The robot is unarmed but able to enter potentially dangerous and confined spaces, providing a live video feed to remote officers.
DigiDog is out of the pound. DigiDog is now part of the toolkit that we are using. So investment in public safety is what we're doing, and we're being smart in how we're doing it.
And he's not alone. Adams says the NYPD will deploy 2 more DigiDogs this summer. It looks like we're living in sci-fi, and that is not a dog that I would like to pet.
A picture of the future, yeah.
Right.
Not so friendly.
Not so friendly. Thanks so much for watching.
Have a great night.